and I want to welcome you to Stringing Words Together. And it's a poetry reading and a musical performance combined. And we want to thank you, Heather, so much, and our New Britain Museum of Art for giving us this incredible opportunity to perform in this venue that couldn't be any more spectacular. To be surrounded by visual art is just too much for me almost to bear. So, excuse me. There's such a richness in experiencing the interconnectedness of the arts and how they serve to enhance one another. And that's sort of my mission. I love to write poetry, I love to read poetry, I love to work with children with poetry, but I love music and I love art, and I think they all enhance one another and they really belong together to me. And I think, Linda, you feel the same way. Yes. And that's sort of how we got together. So, this performance is truly a collaboration, and it's quite different from one of my typical poetry readings. In preparing for it, what I did was I gathered together some of my work that I thought had a connection, either musically or art-wise, and then I gave these poems to Linda and let her do the culling. So she really was a great participant in the literary part of this. She picked out the poems that resonated with her, and then she selected pieces that she thought resonated with them. So I chose to read this poem that I'm going to read because I think it expresses that connection very, very well. Unfortunately, no matter how hard I tried, and I tried very hard, I couldn't get a copy of this Monet painting. And it's called Sunrise. And I did it on my printer at home, and what happened is it came out looking garish, and Monet is anything but garish. So I'm going to describe it a little bit. It's a painting of a harbor scene at sunrise, and there's boats in the foreground, and there's this beautiful orangey, peachy sunrise. And when I have this really strange connection with my senses and the arts and everything. It all mingles for me. And when I saw this painting, I actually felt music. And the painting is called Seeing Sound. The liquid sounds of Clair de Lune are playing Monet, painting pastels, and subtle crescendos of color, as brushstrokes and notes blend with a visual flow of pale blues, greens, and the warm glow of peach, surrounding dark shadows of boats on sun-dappled ripples at dawn, in a softness of sight and sound, where ears and eyes are one. Are ekphrastic. And by that I mean poems either inspired by or about works of art. And I'd like to begin by sharing a poem that I recently wrote about this very gallery, actually. So look around, take it all in. Unfortunately, something in the poem is hiding back here. You'll have to check it out afterwards. Up until about a month ago, I couldn't come into this gallery without feeling I had to leave. There was something very, very intimidating about it to me, and I decided when I found out that this was the gallery where I was going to be reading, that I darn well better come to terms with it. And so I did. I felt I needed to make a connection. But the connection that I made was a very unsettling one. And this is the poem that is the result of that. And the title of the poem is Hieronymus Bosch Redux. Hieronymus Bosch was an artist, a medieval artist. And his paintings were very fantastical about good and evil. And for me, they were terrifyingly surrealistic in content. And they expressed, they showed people in pursuits, in sinful pursuits, let's put it that way. And not in a good way. So I'd apparently been making this connection all along, but I just couldn't put it into words. And I forced myself about a month ago to sit here for 2 hours and just take it in. So I made that unsettling connection, and I'm hoping that no one will leave after this poem, because it is unsettling and it's not typical of my work at all. But it's real, and it's my connection to the murals of Thomas Hartnett. Hieronymus Bosch Redux. These painted panels have always repelled me, but this time I forced myself to stay in the gallery, closed in, suffocating, surrounded by El Greco-like figures, swirling with pain, and stretched out rubber band bodies and arms reaching into the underbelly, body basic, broken, yet believing. Puffing cigars, pointing rifles, revolvers, fingers, tickling keys, lascivious songs, spirituals, an angel blaring through a megaphone. Above it all, a girl child sitting in the lap of darkness. Pianos, guitars, saxophones, violins celebrating sin. Women in full skirts heading their own separate ways after church. Wild horses unable to be tamed. Children playing adjacent to prostitutes. Black stockings, bared legs and breasts. Mirrors reflecting the essence of death. Surreal, gawking men. A garbage can, burnished brown bodies of Indians dancing, shaking rabbits, stomping feet, white horse against buffalo blackness, as rising clouds of smoke extinguish hope. Rolling dice, hands full of cards, cheating faces, sly eyes, farmer silently sitting in a motionless wagon, head resting heavy on hand, exhausted, evangelist, fire and water, people ignoring cacophony, endless motion, emotion. I see the Roman Empire's last decadent and dying echoes. In the roaring 20s, the Great Depression, the vast, discordant void of today.
I'm going to play 4 movements from the Partita in D minor for unaccompanied violin by Johann Sebastian Bach. I'll begin with the Allemande, which is the first movement. Movements are going to be played kind of out of order, and actually there's going to be a folk melody kind of mixed in with it too. Music serves different roles, one of which can be acting as scenery. I would suggest listening to the following 3 movements of the Partita as a backdrop to the poems surrounding them and the art described in the poems. This is Allemande.
that I was here, I only read poems about the artwork that was in the museum itself, in the collection, but I'm expanding upon that today. The first poem that I'm going to read, however, is actually a painting that's, I think, still around the corner. And the poem is inspired by this painting by Grant Wood. And Grant Wood is the artist who did the iconic painting, American Gothic, you know, the pitchfork painting with the farmer and his wife. And this painting is called Sentimental Song. And I've used a bit of poetic license. I don't often do that when I use paintings, but this time I just felt those stupid wine glasses in the front did not befit these big burly guys in the back, so I made them beer mugs, and I had them hoisting them. So basically, I think I have the image. I don't know if you can see it, but afterwards you can definitely take a look at it. And one little tidbit of information about this. When you look at the painting, you might notice some famous faces. I think one of the people in the painting is John Wayne. It was actually done as an ad for a movie that failed. And the poem's name is Imbalanced. Tipsy and tilted in towards each other, sentimental and sloshing in camaraderie, they lift their mugs and sing in celebration of their sorrows. While at home, overtired children run wild, after endlessly waiting for stories and hugs as their daddy's dinners grow cold. And their wives having no time for indulgence are gulping down the loneliness that comes with lukewarm food. Sighing, they wipe their hands on aprons, reach behind to untie knots, hesitate, then doing both halves of a two-person job, holding on to picture books, they trudge upstairs to tuck the little ones in and tell the tales of why their daddies aren't there. Now you'll notice as I go on that I've written several poems about the work of a local Simsbury artist. Ruth, where are you? This is Ruth Jacobson, and she did all these wonderful paintings. And I absolutely love her work, and I'm very moved by it. And thank you for being my muse, Ruth. I've written many, many poems about her artwork. So I decided to use her paintings today. And I used a couple of others, but mostly Ruth's. And we've collaborated before. We did a show together at the Ethel Walker School. And we also did some work together at the Canton Gallery on the Green, and we have some other projects in the works, right, Ruth? Okay. The first, oh, there it is. I don't know if you can see it. Actually, I'm going to hold this one up. This is actually right from my living room wall. So I like her work so much, I even buy it. And the name of the poem is Two Faces. In the market, it takes place in Afghanistan. In the marketplace, I see her eyes staring out flat and wonder what expression hides beneath her burqa. I suspect that the corners of her mouth are weighted down as she holds her girl child, whose empty eyes are already practicing how to survive. The next poem was also inspired by one of Ruth's paintings. She told me a story, but we never quite really talked about the end of the story. So I had this idea that was very different from how she felt about the story behind this. So I don't want anybody to think that the poem really reflects what Ruth is feeling, because it's totally fictional. It's my own interpretation. The details, though, I think are actually pretty realistic, I think. So anyway, it's about this painting, which was a self-portrait. No, it wasn't. I'm quiet. There we go. A little excitement, right? So this poem is called Found Out. Forbidden to pursue what she loves, she pulls her secret tools out from inside the closet, where she hides them wrapped in her clothes. An easel, palette, brushes, and paints, all paid for with months and months of hidden loose change. She's instantly lost in textures, tones, and tints, and acrylics. To be certain, there'll be no hint of a lingering scent. Though she's painted her self-portrait with features and hair in bold colors of blue, red, and gold. When she hears the slightest sound, she quivers and furtively glances outside, begins to sink into the blackness of her sweater as the colors drain from her face. In fear, you'll find out that she's finding herself. The next poem is actually about a Vermeer painting. And it's this one. It's a terrible reproduction. And I'll just explain to you that the guy in the front is a soldier, and he's wearing vivid crimson. And there's a young woman in front of him, and she is totally taken with him. I mean, she is like, she's a god with this guy. So the poem's name is Caution. This young woman's face, in its white kerchief and fur-colored frame, is fully engaged in a story being told from across a table. Like her smile, the soft beige gold of her satin bodice glows in the light that flows from a leaded window. The upturned hand and coy curve of her fingers are an open invitation to her world, which is too small for this oversized man in the foreground. There's foreboding in his boastful stance, in the firmness of his ruffled hand on hip, in the jut of his elbow, and the flashy crimson of his clothes. The broad, jaunty black brim of his hat is aimed at a map of a wider world that hangs on the wall behind her, with boundaries clearly drawn that she is unable to see. based on another one of Ruth's paintings, this one right here, which is based on a photograph of the poet Grace Paley. The title of the poem is Blaze of Glory. This straightforward woman, with her welcoming tangerine smile and wild, wind-blown hair, has an air of confidence and comfort in the skin she's worn long enough to know that with her hands stuffed deep in her pockets and her high-colored, boldly round face, she belongs to this bulky, bright orange blazer. and can hold her own against a background of teal. Hurry for menopause. The next poem is based on this painting, Leather Goose, and I had a lot of fun with the title of this painting, and you'll understand why when you hear the poem. The title is Allure, A-L-L-U-R-E, but it could be 2 words. With her prominent nose, she's not a perfect beauty, but she understands her appeal, makes the most of her wild, long, curly hair and ample cleavage and tiny waist. Flaunting danger, she brazenly tosses herself into a sea of men, and knows that with a quick nod of her head, she'll hook and reel them in for a game of catch and release. The next group of poems have to do with either music or nature or both, if you see things the way I do. And the next poem is a very old one, at least 30 years. And I noticed something very special when I was pregnant with my first child. The poem is called mother's music. You dance within my belly, yet I don't compose the tune. Taut, rippling skin, a beat, all its own, a song that only we share. You flutter within as I dream about the rhythm of life when you're here.
Lover's Waltz is a lyrical folk melody by Joan.
Teacher's voice.
Okay. After Joan reads her next poem, I will perform the Currente, which is the second movement from the Bach Quartet in D minor. I've chosen these two pieces, Lover's Waltz and the Currente, to surround Joan's next poem because they express the different characters of the two flowers described in the poem.
The orchid, sitting on my sill with its subtle flare, deep and perfectly formed flat petals, painted with delicate dots of magenta on a background of the palest green white, languidly bends her body in a slow-motion waltz that will last for months. Outside my window, the exuberant iris rises high above the garden. Propelled by her long-leafed arms, her flower explodes from the top of a tall and sturdy green stem. And everything about her shouts flashing. But she's only trying to get our attention, flaunting her wild flamenco ruffles of deep purple and mauve, and inner hints of bright white and gold, with her spine stretched taut and her head tossed back. You can feel the stomping of her heels and hear the sharp, rhythmic click of her castanets. Unlike the orchids, her blossoms won't last long. She knows this dance must be bold. is about an experience that we shared when I was around 10 years old. My mother loved art, dance, especially dance. And I just want to tell you two little things. Edward Palella was a principal dancer with the New York City Ballet. And most people know about Rudolph Nureyev and Margot Fonteyn. So it's called Lifted Up. My mother had dreamed of being a dancer. It was the only passion of hers, I remember, and the only thing that had ever pushed her past safely. She was on her toes by 5, had deformed them by 7. Yet in her teens, she pretended or hoped as she saved to pay for lessons. Years ago, when I opened a drawer, I found her toe shoes, lovingly wrapped up in lamb's wool. The same shiny black pair that years ago, with laces tied together, she proudly slung over her shoulder as she walked to the bus, until she gave up. Though she was never a hugger, as a child I cleaved to her, wanted to please her, to live out her dream. But both of us knew I could barely walk straight. So instead we sat side by side on the sofa, the most we ever touched, and bonded while watching ballet on TV. Together we held our breath as Edward Villella leapt to surreal heights, and when Nureyev, his back perfectly straight, feet firmly planted apart, waited, poised, to catch Margot Fonteyn in mid-flight. As one, my mother and I flew through the screen and were swooped up high in his arms. The next poem may seem a little odd for the season, but it was actually written about an experience I had in February, only it was in Costa Rica. And we were actually on one of those swinging bridges that, oddly enough, I discovered was on her bedroom wall, a picture of it. So I looked down and I saw this tree, and this is what became of that. It's called What She Wears. Beneath a heavy canopy, dressed in a form-fitting gown, in endless shades of vibrant green, mossy velvet, minuscule leaves of satin and lace, she stretches up towards glittering, misty slivers of sunshine that brilliantly catch the drops of dew she proudly wears as jewels. In September, my husband and I were lucky enough to take a trip to Zion National Park that ended 3 days before the shutdown. And it was beautiful, more than I could have ever imagined. And this poem that I'm about to read is really a tribute to the park. It's called Lullaby. They come in chords, awed by my angles, edges, high canyon walls. They look beyond the green to see the contrast of my bright orange cliffs and pointy gray peaks against blue sky and rolling billows of white. They don't see that like an oversized child, I only appear to be older and have millions of years before me for those edges and peaks to wear down. The crust of earth, its moving plates will rattle my bones. Arid, hot air will blast me with sand. Winter will whip me with snow and hail-filled wind. Flash floods dragging debris will scrape my walls and floor. Ice will expand and contract as it cracks and chips me away. But every day, in the late afternoon, when the sun shifts before sunset, it offers me blankets of dark purple shadows, whose softness unfolds into crevices and river-carved bowls. As snugly I welcome its soft glow of pink and gold, till cradled in the deepest midnight blue, safe beneath the night-light moon, I drift into sleep to the silent rhythmic tune of blinking stars. What they fear becomes almost real, but questions remain, open wounds that time cannot heal. And one woman trying to hold on to hope as she folds and unfolds her son's clothing, presses her face into the fabric to suck in what's left of his scent. The next poem is the last one I'm going to read about my mother, and I chose to read it because the event that inspired the poem happened right downstairs in the gallery, right underneath that room. And suffice it to say that it's a good thing there was not a guard present, and I never been allowed back into the museum. My mother had Alzheimer's disease, and I didn't realize how far backwards she had gone. She loved art museums, so I thought, what a great idea, I'll take her to the art museum. And this was a turning point in her care and my relationship with her. And it's called Back to Before, and it's based on a seascape experience in the museum. Back to Before. She stares at the painting of an endless seascape, her eyes and mind dimmed with age. She's moved way past the forbidden. And as the glistening thick swirls of deep blue-green brushstrokes fall her to touch, she feels the texture, the tips of her fingers, and finally sees. Her senses flare with the primitive thrill of sloshing sounds in the dark as she sinks into the surface and sways in the distant reminiscence of gentle waves, rocking and riding these soft as it swells to the undercurrent's distant, steady pulse. There's no point in telling her not to touch. She's compelled in discovering the beginning at the end. The next poem is called As Simple, and it's for my friend Anna. We sit at the table surrounded by wreaths, hands wrapped around hot mugs of coffee, our forks pushing cake on our plates. She's wondering aloud how to put herself back together again when the biggest piece is missing. Then, in her delicate, lilting, velvety voice, she remembers her grandmother's recipe for a dark, round poppy seed, flourless cake layered in buttercream. And as she begins to travel within, her huge, pale green eyes brighten. The corners of her mouth tilt slightly upward. Hidden dimples appear, and rose returns to her cheeks. It's hard to tell if she's talking to us or herself, as she recounts the making of noodles in the kitchen of a tiny house just outside Kiev, where dough is stretched over every available table and surface, and rolled into cylinders, sliced into strips, and spread out to dry all over the house on sheets covered with cheesecloth. And remembering how her grandmother let her help cut the dough, she feels the comfort of the warm, calloused hand that firmly guided hers on the knife as she pushed down hard to slice. And life was as simple as homemade food and the soothing scent of chicken noodle soup. The next poem is sort of a similar theme, and I wasn't going to read this one, but I feel that with the next poems I'm going to read that I need to read this poem. Unfortunately, it let me know how ancient I am. When we were safe, before there were seatbelts, and before the Twin Towers, we'd travel to family gatherings from Westchester to the Bronx to Queens, in our father's huge and dusty dark blue Suburban. We'd cross the only bridge, the Whitestone, with its swooping, endless arc suspended from steel cables. And as we drove from borough to borough, we'd crowd our little bodies toward the window of the view, pressing our wide open faces against the glass to gaze at the broad expanse of sea and the distant drama of city skyline. We'd chatter and buzz with the excitement of seeing our cousins, and our mouths would water in anticipation of homemade cookies and cakes. Woozy, at the end of the day, we'd mindlessly pull our PJs up over rounded, full bellies. And after Mommy and Daddy patted the back of the wagon with blankets and pillows, we'd clamber up and wait for the familiar clanking slam of the heavy door and snuggle in for the ride home with our dolls and stuffed animals. Once settled in, we'd drift to the motor's steady hum and the softness of adult whispers. And though, beneath our dreams, even we vaguely sense the comfort of gentle arms and hands wrapping us in covers while lifting us up. We remain unaware, and in the morning, when we awoke, to magically find ourselves tucked into bed, we were certain we'd always be safe. This is a tough one. Coming up on, we're coming up on the anniversary of Sandy Hook. And the following two poems were written during the very week that it took place. And they're both dedicated to all the people who lost their lives on that terrible day. The first poem was especially dedicated to little Emily Parker, whose beautiful image is referred to in the poem. And now Linda is going to play the Pastoral Symphony from the Christmas section of Handel's Messiah. you'll understand why I'm saying this, that I now have a beautiful picture on the wall that's in a gold frame. It could have been. In a matter of minutes and madness, in a barrage of bullets and broken glass, her life and and her families were shattered. Her picture is a constant on the TV screen, and I'm haunted by the almost mirror image of this sweet 6-year-old child that hangs on my wall. Both little girls are blue-eyed and blonde, with light-beam smiles and faces disarmingly tilted, but mine is alive. And the picture's black-bordered frame, which was perfect last week, now feels like an open coffin. I know that not everybody will agree with me politically, but I had a real hard time understanding why I had to write the next poem, and it's called Great Gifts. It was written like days after Sandy Hook. Great Gifts. It's Christmas time, and the world is full of death and joy. I sit at the table, warm mug of coffee and paper in hand, as I flip through the pages looking for stories of gun control and holiday cheer. But instead I find a layout of ads festively trimmed in red and white snowflakes and bold, evergreen words. Great gifts for the youth hunter. Pistols, rifles, bullets, sights. Shipped for free to celebrate the season.
Donna Nobi's Poncho, Let There Be Peace.
And I know that I might be pushing it a little bit because this is really about a bar mitzvah, but the holiday season is about ritual. And this is the theme of this piece, and there are a few words I need to explain to some of you. Kiddush cup, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Kiddush cup is the cup that we use for wine when we do blessings. A shul is a Yiddish word for synagogue, and to daven is what Orthodox Jewish men do when you see them go like this. It's called davening. And there's also a reference to prayer shawls. The threads from prayer shawls. Very devout Jewish men wear prayer shawls under their clothing, and the tassels hang out underneath. The Torah is a scroll of parchment that contains the first 5 books of Scripture, and children read a passage from this during their bar or bat mitzvah. The title of the poem is Tasting the Fruit of the Vine. My Kiddush cup was empty, but I was still a Jew, confused. My menorah sat beside a Christmas tree. I barely touched tradition. Religion was a void. And then I had a son for whom I lit the Sabbath candles. I went into the temple where I'd never been before, imagining men in black coats would daven me out of their house. But instead, I was welcomed home. Though I couldn't read a word, I learned to sing along and gradually grabbed the common threads that hung from prayer shawls. Communal arms held me in the hum of familiar chants. And when my son began his reading from the Torah, the modern sanctuary became an ancient shul. The shaven men grew beards and wore long robes. And I'm glad you're here today. You're the inspiration. I have Ruth here and I have Beth here. I hated November. The only good thing that ever happened in November is I had a kid in November. But I hated November and early December. And I brought this up in my art class where Beth was. And she was shocked when I shared this. And then she went into why she loves this time of year. And I'm a convert. I now really love November. So this is the result. It's called Beyond Bare Branches. I shed my frilly, colorful clothes and back to basic brown. And with all of the gawkers gone, I bask in the quiet transition of seasons. Finally able to see, I breathe freely, deeply under wide open sky. My naked body and outstretched arms bathed in sunshine that soaks into my roots and pour with warmth for winter. Thank you. The next poem is a poem that I wrote after taking a walk in Roaring Brook Nature Center. Anybody familiar with Roaring Brook Nature Center?
Marjorie's the assistant director.
Perfect. This was many, many years ago, and the stream was almost completely frozen across the top. And this is called Under the Surface. Suspended motion, crackled in ice, glitters on the stream, bubbles pressed up against canopy glass, zigzagging gurgle through snares, till finally water spills out over stones, splashing freedom on snow-covered banks. Winter love. Sitting by the fire, tucked tightly in a furry throw, I rock and watch giant snowflakes float and fall in the season's first snow, while wondering why we contemplate leaving winter behind. Though in the last flushness of August is what I dread, I've begun to abandon summer, embrace the cold, and am falling in love once again. I'm reading this poem only because I think a lot of us who live in this part of the country feel this way. It's sort of like a schizophrenic experience of living up here. It's called Counting the Moments. Swimming in mid-August, lushness and warmth. I should be in the moment, but instead, I'm counting them. And as I catch the sight of deck chairs, their color white, reminds me of snow, the cold, and wind to come. And when it does, I'll be sitting wrapped in blankets, in my rocker by the hearth, book in hand, breathing in the scent of hickory smoke, and savory steam rising from soup on the stove. And though I should be in the moment, I'll be counting them instead. And this is the very last poem that I'm going to read. And it's called Holiday Decorations. I wrote this right after an ice storm. Celebrating, the storm sprinkles mirrors on the world, transforming trees whose pine cones are encased in a crystal glaze, and whose fans of needles on evergreen branches are draped in long, glassy strands. No scattered sparkle or clumps of limp tinsel. These icicles glitter for real. No rhythmic patterns of colored lights, and the waxing and waning of a lingering breeze. Sun and shadow are taking turns.